You are listening to the Hemp Startup Journey. My name is Jason De Los Santos, co-founder of Spectrum Labs, a hemp extraction facility in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm sitting down with hemp entrepreneurs, scientists, and politicians willing to share their perspectives, lessons learned, and how we can make an impact on the hemp and cannabis industry for everyone. Eloise, good morning, and thank you so much for joining me on the Hemp Startup Journey. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Great. So I practiced your name a few times, Eloise Theisen. Really excited to have you. We spoke briefly the other day. I've been looking forward to this. And one of the main reasons, I can't remember how much we went into this last time we spoke, is that I have a better understanding of cannabis in the consumer side and in the production side. In the healthcare world, I'm not so clear on how people perceive, cannabis and hemp, and so that's one of the main reasons why I really want to get your insights into just those conversations that happen, in the back room when you're caring for a patient. So thank you so much. I think I'm really looking forward to this.
Great, me too. Thank you.
So then one of the things that I like to start with is if you're at a party, I know this is the worst time to ask this because of everything that's going on, but if you're at a party or a networking event and somebody says, "Hey, Eloise, nice to meet you. What do you do?" How do you answer that?
Yeah, it's evolved over the years. I definitely, in the beginning, had some hesitation about admitting what I do, but I tell them that I'm a nurse practitioner who specializes in cannabis.
Okay.
And it's either a conversation starter or it stops the conversation right there.
Really? What's the percentage? Like, what's the going rate of acceptance and wanting to know more?
That's definitely evolved as well. I would say it's probably 75% of the time people are intrigued and, oh, wait, you know about CBD? That's generally what now the conversation will be about. And then some people will go, huh? Anyways.
Change very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. And so then the other question to start off with is because this industry, just with cannabis in general, and with my even smaller niche with hemp, it's kind of crazy, and I always question why people got into it. So how did you end up in this space? Where you had so many different options with nursing.
I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I mean, I didn't expect to ever be in this field of nursing, and it's still really, I would say, an evolving field for nursing. So back in 2012, I came to cannabis for my own personal experience and had such great success with it that I became quite curious as to why it wasn't offered by my clinicians. And I ended up on so many medications, and that was always their offer to me. Every time I came in and said, I'm not getting any better, they would say, well, just take this and just take this. And I ended up in the emergency room with an overdose of what's called serotonin syndrome, which can kill you. And it's because you're on so many medications that block your serotonin uptake that it can put you in a coma. And that was sort of the final straw for me when I realized that, what was being offered to me was just, they were giving me the best that they knew, right? It was like, just try this medication, try this. So I just started to really dive into cannabis as a medicine and became really curious about it, and then started meeting quite a bit of resistance from my colleagues and my peers and even my friends and family, as to whether this was a legitimate path. But because, many people who come to cannabis and become extreme advocates have their own story, it sort of drives us to continue to, help others and get the word out there. And so I started doing my clinical hours for my nurse practitioner in oncology because that was my background. And I just had patients asking me about it every day. They were really curious. Is this an option for me? I'm in pain and this isn't helping. And I just recognized that patients were really desperate for information from their clinicians and they weren't getting it. So I took that leap of faith and said, okay, I'm gonna hang my shingle and see if people will come. And at that time in California, it was required for them to see a nurse practitioner or a physician to be qualified for medical cannabis. Excuse me. So I had quite a growing and booming practice for many, many years until legalization came in 2018. And then people just stopped going to see, any kind of healthcare practitioner because it wasn't required. So now they've primarily just been going straight to the dispensary to get their information. And that's where I really hope to see, nurses make a difference, is by really helping to bridge that gap and continue to increase the information and the validity of that information for consumers and other healthcare professionals.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that story. A couple of questions. One, before you had that incident with, you said it was a serotonin overdose.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your sentiment towards cannabis? Were you against it? Were you for it?
I was using it already.
Okay.
But just in, when I went to high school, I consumed quite a bit. I wasn't afraid of it. I just went into nursing school and took on this attitude of like, oh, well, cannabis is marijuana is a drug, and I got drug tested, and so there were all these things that sort of led me to stop using it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I had my chronic pain, when I had my accident, I did have people trying to encourage me to use cannabis, and it took me 6 months to really say, you know what, okay, fine, I'll try it. But I was just kind of taking it here and there. I wasn't really using it as a medicine. It was just sort of like, kind of throwing whatever things at the wall to see what would stick. And then when I had that overdose, I recognized that, these medications were more dangerous for me. So I used cannabis to come off everything. I was on about 8 different medications and went through some pretty significant withdrawals. It was a really, really, really tough time. I can see why patients don't come off some of these medications, because those withdrawals are just they're awful.
Yeah.
So, that's when I started realizing that if we apply this as a true medicine, I think we can increase our chances of success.
Okay. So if we can talk a little bit about the ACNA, the American Cannabis Nurses Association, that is a big part of your life right now. And if you can just tell us in general, wherever you'd like to start, what's the mission of the ACNA and what do you do?
Yeah. So actually, ACNA has been around for 10 years. It's a nonprofit nursing organization with over 1,400 members now across the United States. We do have some from the UK and Australia that have joined our organization. And our mission really is to educate. We want to educate, we want to advance cannabis nursing excellence, and that's through education, advocacy, collaboration, and research. So we have really been a grassroots organization, and this year, I took over as president this year, and my role has really been to take us from that grassroots to a professional organization. And I would say one of our biggest goals is to provide certification for nurses who want to specialize in cannabis. And that's, it's a very long and intense process. We started it a couple of years ago. We've been working with the American Nurses Association, which is the largest nursing organization in the United States. And they provide that credentialing. So they've been working with us. They actually have been very receptive. They were really excited to learn about us, and they were actually really thrilled that we're considering credentialing. But like I said, it'll be about 5 to 10, maybe even 10 years before we can actually complete that. And of course, the biggest challenge and barrier that we have is the lack of evidence-based research in large randomized controlled trials, right? Those gold standards that healthcare professionals rely on for their information really is lacking in cannabis. And I just did a presentation yesterday to the Oncology Nursing Society, which is a large nursing organization, and on cannabis. And I'm always ready for their feedback to me of, well, we can't use that because there's not enough evidence to support it. And they're not wrong, right? But they really need to understand the barriers and why there's not enough evidence. And that doesn't mean that we can't still be evaluating the risk versus the benefit for some of these patients and their quality of life, and to offer them something that's palliative, that's going to improve their symptoms with usually very little risk and very few side effects. So just getting them to understand the history and the barriers and the challenges that we have, sometimes that helps, and then they become more open to cannabis as a therapy. Sometimes it's kind of just feeds their there's stigma and fear around it. Well, I can't recommend that. There's just not enough evidence. So,
Yeah.
I really would love to see our organization get more involved in research, but we're an all volunteer organization. I'm a volunteer as the president. So it is hard to really get things going in a timely manner. You have to bring everything back to the board, and the board has to vote on it. And so, but I think we've done some really great things already this year. We put out a position statement on post-traumatic stress, really urging the nation to consider cannabis for treating symptoms of post-traumatic stress. I think, looking at the pandemic and the mental health issues that we're all experiencing now, cannabis is one of the most, PTSD is one of the most common approved medical conditions in other states. So, and we do have quite a bit of evidence to support, cannabis is effective for post-traumatic stress. We're also going to put out a position paper on workplace drug testing for nurses and pretty much everybody. But again, just, some of these things that are out there that are really barriers to, for nurses, and they're barriers for patients. We really want to make a statement on those things.
In regards to the evidence, what is it that the medical community is looking for? Because every day it seems like I'm inundated with, here's a new study that was done, or, cannabis or hemp may treat this. And I know we're not at the point yet where there's conclusive evidence, right? But there's a whole bunch of research. So what is it that the medical community needs to see to say, okay, like that makes sense and I'm more comfortable recommending it? Or is it more of what you were saying, that it's maybe just that part of it is the stigma of this being, an illicit drug?
Yeah, I think it's both, really, Jason. Of course, they want the double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, and they want them large numbers of people. We have some studies where we have 40 to 50, participants, and that's not enough for them. But it's really hard to have a placebo of at least THC. Yeah. It has been done. You can do it. But it's a little bit hard to I think when you're going to get THC.
Right.
We also have the challenge, of course, of when these studies are happening in the United States, that the cannabis that we have to use comes from Mississippi, which is really, thought to be more like hemp than it is marijuana. And so the THC levels are really low. They don't match what consumers are using in other states, where we see sometimes 30% THC products. Here, at least in California, we've seen that high. And of course, you also have the challenge of with the research, is that a lot of people don't actually want to participate in it. So we have a good example would be pregnancy. Moms who are pregnant and maybe want to use cannabis for their hyperemesis, where they have that extreme vomiting that can put them at risk of malnutrition, and they may not want to come forward for a study because of the stigma. They're afraid that they're going to lose their baby. They don't feel safe. They don't feel protected. I mean, we've just demonized cannabis for so long. I don't know how we're going to get past that stigma. We continue to portray cannabis users as negative in the media, that typical stoner, that pothead. It's funny, ha ha ha. We're not portraying these medical patients who are, getting their lives back and going back to life and actually becoming productive members of society. And so I think that people just, draw upon those old stereotypical stoner, and the medical community does as well. I mean, that's the pushback that I get often is, well, it causes schizophrenia and it's a gateway drug, and, and on and on and on. And a lot of those myths have been just, we've definitely been able to bust a lot of those myths. But again, it's just like, I don't know why, sometimes you can't undo that in some of these clinicians. It's just hardwired in them.
Yeah, I can understand some of it. Before I started in this industry, my mom raised me to think that anyone that was using drugs was just a bad person. Like, she wouldn't say it outright like that, but just don't do drugs. It just leads to bad things. And marijuana was the first drug that I ever heard of. And so for my entire adult life up until recently, I had that thought like, oh, well, let's say when you do weed, when you smoke weed or whatnot, you're just doing it for fun. Like that there's no necessarily, that there's not a health benefit to it. You're just doing it because you want to waste a few hours. But I've seen that's, sure, there are those folks that will do that, but I guess in my world, talking with folks that just want to get better in some part of their life, that the fun aspect is just sort of secondary from my perspective. So
yeah, I would push back on that a little bit and say, you know, we're encouraged to go out there and find recreation and pleasure and enjoyment. But when it comes to cannabis, if that's recreational or enjoyable, it's bad for some reason, right?
sure.
So it's, you know, when I have some of my cancer patients who are so sick, you know, we talk about that quote unquote high that can happen. You know, I like to explore that. Well, what do you mean? What's it mean to get high?
Mm-hmm.
And they're often afraid of being paranoid or hallucinating or losing control. But we talk about that euphoria and how it can be really helpful for them to explore happiness again and joy and feel more communicative with their spouse and less irritable. And, you know, all of these benefits that can happen that we tend to put into this category. It's like, well, if we enjoy that, that's bad. So,
Yeah.
you know, really trying to change the conversation around euphoria and how that can benefit your health and your well-being, especially right now. But, you know, and people can, you know, they can chase that euphoria. So it is a balancing act and something clinicians should really be following and making sure that it's, you know, people are using it safely and not overusing it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I don't think I ever thought about it that way, that there's nothing wrong with feeling good, right? Even if maybe for you as a person, you're not looking to heal anything, but maybe just to enjoy something safely, that's a good thing. And maybe just for our mental health, that could be a good thing as well.
Yeah.
Learned something new today, Eloise. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about something that's been very timely. We're in the world of Corona right now, just with COVID-19 and coronavirus. We're in the beginning of or middle of September right now, and we just spoke briefly about this the other day. Can you talk a little bit about the correlation that some folks are making between CBD specifically and coronavirus? There was a shop near us not too long ago, had a sign outside that pretty much said CBD can prevent or, you know, cure coronavirus or something like that. Which, yeah. So what are you hearing? What are you seeing about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of well-meaning advocates in the industry that really want, you know, cannabis to be researched and taken seriously as a medicine. And we have, you know, research to demonstrate that CBD can help with immunity. We know that our CB2 receptors in our body are primarily found in our immune cells. So we see a lot of evidence to support that activating those receptors can help decrease inflammation. We've also seen that cannabinoids can help with the cytokine storm, which is thought to be one of the biggest, deadliest side effects of COVID-19. None of this has been demonstrated in humans, again, so it's really difficult to take some of this animal research and try to apply it to humans. You know, you're not always comparing apples to apples. So I can see why people want to promote CBD or cannabinoids in general as something that can, you know, treat coronavirus or COVID-19. We saw this initially happening with some CBD companies, same thing online. They had their COVID-19 CBD kit that you could buy. Right. FDA got smart to it, sent them warning letters and shut them down. And then we had some people in the industry that were actually trying to say, don't take CBD or THC for COVID-19 because there's, again, you know, the research is primarily conflicting most of the time. You know, does it suppress the immune system or does it build it up? You know, and so there is some evidence that THC can suppress the immune system. Again, we don't really know at what levels or how much or how often people are consuming it where we see these potential effects. So we saw some people in the industry that were saying, don't take THC, don't smoke it. And now we're also seeing some companies, some biotech companies that are coming in with cannabinoids that are synthetic, that are trying to activate these CB2 receptors to see if it will help, with COVID-19. So there's some very early clinical trials happening. I would love, the thing I always say to people is, look, we deserve to have the research so that we can make informed decisions about this. Whether the research comes out and says, CBD is not going to help with COVID-19, we deserve to know that and be able to make those informed decisions. The same thing about mothers who are breastfeeding or are pregnant and they've tried everything else and they want to try cannabis. They should know the risks and benefits so they can make an informed decision. But we don't have that luxury with cannabis.
So starting to get into that. So can you talk about just nurses on the front lines? So like I mentioned when we started, that I haven't had very many conversations with nurses, and how the conversations that you then have with your patients, people that you're treating at a doctor's office or at a hospital. What are those conversations like? How do patients come up to you and ask? And and I would assume that a lot of folks, total assumption that they would be maybe hesitant to ask you, thinking that like, oh, maybe I'm doing something wrong if I'm just considering it. But just in general, what can you say about just nurses and cannabis and cannabinoids?
Yeah, I think it depends on the environment. So, I mean, when I was doing my nurse practitioner hours, I would close the door, and be in the room with the patient, and they would whisper it to me, what do you think about cannabis? And I'd be like, I don't know who you're concerned about hearing this. I mean, they were kind of
Just
scared
really
to say anything. And you could tell it was a big deal to say something. And, so, and then it just got to the point where, when I was in this practice that, word was out, there's somebody there that will talk to you about cannabis. And it was just like, it got to the point where the people in the office actually thought I was promoting it, like I had to have a little talking to,
Yeah.
like, look, I said, your patients are using it, trust me. When I'm working right now as a palliative care nurse practitioner, and I had a patient the other day where I was like, oh God, he would so benefit from cannabis. I have to walk this fine line where I can't be promoting it. I need them to bring it up to me. And I just happened to see in his chart that he had tried a CBD cream. And so that was my opening. I said, oh, I saw you tried this cream, and how did it go? And it was just like the floodgates opened. I've got all these products, Eloise, and I've been trying them, and what do you think? And it was just like he found his unicorn, right? And then we have, when I'm in my practice, of course, people are coming to me specifically to talk about cannabis. So that environment is much more relaxed for them, much more open. And in other areas, a lot of the nurses are trying to start their own practice that focuses on cannabinoid therapies to give patients a safe place to come to, that they know that this is the goal, that, what they're going to be talking about. But in hospital settings, when I talk to nurses that are still in these organizations, it's very, I would say my perception is they feel very anxious about discussing it with the healthcare team. I have a patient right now who, and I don't remember if we talked about it before, but she's got a history of rheumatoid arthritis for many decades, and then was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And both of those alone can be very painful diseases. And now she's got these two, and she's been in miserable pain and doesn't respond to opioids. Was very, very hesitant to come to cannabis. Would say things to me like, I don't want to be drugged or high in front of my kids. Meanwhile, she's on these very powerful opiates. She's slurring her words with me. Her perception of pot versus these pain pills, right? We got her on cannabis. She's doing amazing. She's come off of her opiates. She has to go into the hospital and get a bone marrow transplant for her multiple myeloma, and they will not allow her to continue her cannabis. And these nurses are afraid to advocate for her because because when people have an opinion about cannabis, it's usually very strong and very passionate either way, either for or against. So, it's helping these nurses find their voice to become advocates for these patients is really important. Trying to present the information. I always tell them, be curious with the care team. I'm curious why you don't think cannabis is a good option, and trying to educate them so that they can come back with some quality research. I mean, the thing, earlier, Jason, when you said we were talking about the evidence, there is substantial evidence that cannabis is effective for chronic pain, but we don't encourage it. We don't, most of the time patients have to choose between their opiates and their pain medication. So even though we do have substantial evidence, we still don't have a medical community that will support it. So I don't know. It's perplexing sometimes, like the stigma goes that deep.
Yeah, and one of the things that stood out from what you were saying there is the great level of questioning, because people don't typically change when you finger wag at them, right? And you say like, you're so wrong, and here's how you should be thinking about it. So the way that you pose that question is just, why do you think that this is X? Why do you think that this is a bad thing, or why do you think that this person shouldn't use it? And sort of reaching the door a little bit and trying to understand where they're coming from, so that then you can adjust your maybe your influence or whatever it is that you're trying to get across, as opposed to just trying to knock down the wall with your saying it incorrectly, but like your almightiness about how you know so much more, that will probably not convert anyone or even have them consider it.
Yeah. I mean, people can become sort of evangelistic around, cannabis, because again, like I said, it works so well for people, then it becomes life-changing, and then they're out there, almost proselytizing,
Yeah.
And people aren't going to listen to that, like you said. I mean, these physicians want the evidence, and they need to have more of an open mind. I think we're seeing so many patients lead the change right now. Over the last 7 years that I've been working with patients, I really, they'll call me up and say, my doctor doesn't want me to use this. And I said, you need to advocate for yourself. Is it working? Yes. Then why can't you have it? And you need to put them on the spot about that, and I help them do it in a professional way, so that, and really coach them through that. And it's been remarkable sometimes to see what happens when you empower patients to advocate for themselves. I wish that, so locally I've had a lot of success with that. And that's why I think nurses can really, that's why I really think nurses are going to lead the change in this, because we can empower our patients, we can educate them and help advocate for them. And I think that they can have those conversations with their physicians, and I've had physicians, call me up and say, I've completely changed my mind about cannabis because of you. You changed. I mean, I had this one young man who was going through treatment for leukemia, and the doctor called me up and she said, I'm sending everybody to you now because you gave this kid his life back. She's like, he is a different kid. And I said, I know, thank you. I mean, what a gift, that she was willing to be open about it and collaborate with me. So it's, that's the hard part, is it takes a while when you're kind of doing it one person at a time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it seems like the way that people either believe in the possibilities, at least, right, or maybe even become an advocate, is when the story touches them, whether it's that themselves individually, or they had somebody close, or maybe in a professional environment, maybe it's a patient. And it seems like until that happens, like it's really hard for them to say like, oh, well, that was something else, right? Like it was just coincidence. So yeah, I can see how that could be really tough for that story to get them, especially if, like you're saying, some people are even scared or maybe really hesitant to just bring it up because they fear some sort of repercussion.
Judgment. Early on it was, I don't want to tell my physician, he may not want to treat me anymore. And like, I don't know that that's legal for them to drop you just because of your choices of, wanting to use cannabis, which is legal in the state of California. It was medical for, a couple decades. So, giving them permission to talk about it and, coaching them through that is really valuable.
Is there anything that you think would, because it seems like the themes that keep coming up is the stigma and not being able to educate people on a mass scale. And plus we've had this conversation for the past 80 plus years about how cannabis is just a bad thing. So is there anything that would speed up the process so that people can at least have some sort of an understanding that, not necessarily that everybody should do it and like we should all be smoking, but just at least that there's an opportunity to help people with it? Like, is there anything that would speed up that process of people being able to understand?
I think descheduling I am all for descheduling the plant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Epidiolex was descheduled this year. So, you know, the cannabidiol, FDA approved cannabidiol was descheduled. And I would like to see, if it's descheduled, you know, then that opens up the research. And even if it's rescheduled, that will help with the research. If it was required education, just like, you know, nurses have certain education they're required to, you know, have every year, every couple of years for their license, just like we have to have, you know, HIPAA training or sexual harassment training. You know, we should be required to have endocannabinoid training. That's when it'll get to the masses, is when it's becomes mandatory education.
Yeah. Let's see, trying to figure out where to go. I still have a million questions over here for you. How about we talk about hemp versus THC products? We briefly spoke about that last time, and you mentioned that this is sometimes a conversation that you have, that folks think, well, if somebody has told me that I have to smoke weed, like that's my only option. But that might not be the case for folks depending on what's going on with them. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, sometimes when people come to me with the emergence of hemp, they don't realize that hemp and, you know, cannabis come from the same family, Cannabis sativa. They think CBD is something completely separate. So there's a lot of times kind of first really diving into what do they want help with? And looking at, you know, what are their goals and their symptoms, and then having that conversation about, you know, which cannabinoid might be most appropriate. And again, you know, helping, you know, usually one of the few questions I'll start out with is, you know, what does it mean to get high, to them, and tell me why now that you're coming to cannabis. You know, was it a family member that was pushing you to it? That helps me determine how ready they are. Oh, well, my daughter just keeps telling me I need to smoke pot, and I'm just here to, you know, satisfy her. Well, that person's not going to have success, right? Or, you know, I'm desperate, I've tried everything else. Whatever you recommend, Eloise, I will do it. You know, that's somebody who's open and willing. Most people kind of fall in the middle, where they're still sort of like, I don't know, I'm kind of scared. So really having that conversation and educating them around, here's the different options you have, here's the potential side effects, here's the approach that we'll take. So building that confidence for them around cannabinoids and THC, and also presenting the research. You know, we do have research that demonstrates, you know, THC is really valuable for most things. CBD on its own isn't going to influence our cannabinoid receptors as well as it would if THC was there. So again, that entourage effect that you hear about, that synergism of the different cannabinoids, and having that conversation with them so that they, you know, they're getting some education to help them make informed choices as well. Like, yes, we could try this. And here's what I've seen success-wise, and here's what the research and evidence shows. If you want to start there, we can, but I also think this is a better option for you, and here's why. And just, it usually is a shared decision. You know, sometimes I can educate people all day long, and they're like, nope, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
You know.
Now, is there a common or maybe a most common recommendation where you say, here's where you can consider hemp as opposed to cannabis? Does that come up?
Yeah, I mean, here in California, you know, when I first started in this, you know, the hemp industry was chaotic. You know, I didn't have a lot of trust or faith in hemp products because of the lack of regulations and testing. And The industry has really done a good job, the hemp industry, of cleaning itself up, and there's a lot of really great players now. And there's great ways to assure that the product out there is clean and safe. In California, when regulations or when legalization went into effect, we actually didn't have regulations either. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in cannabis products as a clinician because there was no required testing. People would test it, but they'd also test and they'd be full of mold and it could still be sold. It could be full of pesticides, it could still be sold. So I had to do a lot of research on companies, both cannabis and hemp, before I felt confident that these products were safe for patients. And now, where a lot of times hemp may be a better choice is, one, if somebody's out of state, they're in a state where they don't have legal access to medical cannabis. If they're in a state like California, right now, we can't sell hemp products in a dispensary. So there are lots of CBD products in dispensaries, but you're subject to, 45 to 48% taxes, depending on the city and county that you're in. So it can become very cost prohibitive for patients. And when I know that here's a hemp-based CBD product that's clean, the test results are good, and it's half the price, that may be where I'm going to offer it to them instead of a cannabis CBD product. And sometimes, we really do need those THC levels to be incredibly low, or maybe even, a broad spectrum where the THC has been removed. So it's nice to have options like that. We're also seeing some companies come out beyond CBD now, like CBN, CBG, cannabinoids, which of course kind of falls into this gray area of legality, Delta 8, THC. So it really does open up access for people who are in states where either there's no medical program, or maybe there's a medical program, but their condition doesn't qualify them.
Yeah. What do you think about Delta 8? It's been a big topic in the past few months.
It has been, huh? It's getting a lot of attention. I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with it here in California through there's a cannabis company here that makes a Delta 8 product. It's a sublingual tablet, and also like a capsule tablet that they make. There's some research that goes back decades out of Israel with Dr. Raphael Meshulam, looking at Delta 8 for nausea and vomiting in chemotherapy patients. It was kids. But he had 100% success rate at preventing nausea and vomiting in these pediatric oncology patients. So, looking at that research is when I started to get curious about Delta 8. And I do use it a lot in my cancer patients who have not responded to the traditional pharmaceuticals for nausea and vomiting, or they're still kind of queasy or whatever. And I see about 85% of the time they have a good response to Delta 8. It is less likely to be impairing than Delta 9 THC, so they tend to tolerate it pretty well. They don't have a lot of psychoactive effects that they can get from THC, Delta 9. So I have limited experience with it. I am concerned about Delta 8 and even Delta 9 THC in some of these hemp products, because that 0.3% THC at dry weight, when it is made into a concentrate, that THC level in some of these products that are like 100 milligrams per mil of CBD can have 2 to 4 milligrams of THC in it. And that, if somebody takes that entire dose, that's impairing for most people. They're going to feel, some euphoria from that. So, and I just read this morning that there's some reports of people marketing CBD, but it's actually really THC cannabis. So we're, again, those THC levels could be all over the place, and these consumers who are uneducated are, going to have an interesting day.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to have a big surprise. Did the article say, was that because the company was doing it on purpose, or they just made the product incorrectly and they had too much THC?
I think it was intentional. I think it's a way to get into the, it's essentially, I mean, gosh, when I first started doing this, I talk to patients all over the world, and they'll call me up and And they will sometimes be like, so I'm growing these tomatoes. And I'm like, it's okay. There's no one on the line, like giving them permission not to be paranoid.
Right.
And so, and sometimes I'll talk to them and I'll say, and they'll finally say, okay, I'm using it. Okay, great. Where are you getting it from? And I will find these websites, Jason, where they're selling these cartridges of THC that you can just purchase right online.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where's this coming from? What's in it? So a lot of that is happening out there. And it is intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy because you figure it's one of those things that if you're so blatant about it, that at some point you're going to get caught. But I guess
Right.
maybe they're not very risk averse.
Yeah.
They don't really care. So you mentioned earlier that you were you became an entrepreneur, not necessarily on purpose, just accidentally. Just wondering if you have any problems to be solved, in your world with nursing and just cannabis. Is there something that if you could snap your fingers and it would be solved, like it would just make so many people's lives better very quickly?
Yeah, it comes back to that descheduling
Okay.
of cannabis. It's banking is really hard. When I opened my practice, I couldn't get a bank account. Finally, was able to get a local bank to allow me to open a bank account because, I'm like, I don't touch the plant. The American Cannabis Nurses Association was shut down because we have cannabis in our name. So our banking services where we just take membership dues from our members, I have to report people like this because in my opinion, it's discrimination. We're not doing anything federally illegal. The barriers that are there around it being a Schedule I drug and being federally illegal just continue to trickle in all areas. And I just would love to see that, that Schedule I status changed, removed, and it's likely it'll be rescheduled then descheduled. That doesn't mean we don't want it to be descheduled. I would love to see patients empowered on how to grow their own medicine and make their own, balms and tinctures if they need to. It is so expensive right now for them to explore cannabis as a medicine between, seeing a specialist and having to pay out of pocket for their consultation. And the cost of, the medicine can be really high. Sometimes these tinctures are $120. So really, if it was covered by insurance, it would be great. It can't be because it's federally illegal.
Right.
So I want patients to have the same access to cannabis medicine as they do other options.
Okay. And so then starting to wrap up here, make sure that we leave enough time for your next event. What's next for you or for ACNA? Like and also added to that is what are things or projects that you could use help with for folks out there?
Mm-hmm. Well, ACNA is going to have its second conference this year in December, and it will be virtual, December 6th through the 8th. And we're really excited to have this opportunity to educate as many nurses as we can out there. We're really focused on working with other nursing organizations like the mental health nurses, the pain management nurses, the oncology nurses. We want to collaborate with them so that we can help educate their members, and really, the more that we educate nurses, the more it's going to help patients, right? Because then we can meet them where they're at and help them determine, if this is the right choice for them and how to go about it safely and effectively. The organization definitely needs volunteers. Again, we're an all volunteer organization. So when our members come on, we do ask them if they want to be involved in committees. We've got some great committees that we have right now. We have an advocacy, diversity and inclusion committee. We have a policy and government affair committee. And we obviously have the conference committee. We have our credentialing committee trying to move again towards getting cannabis nursing credentialed. those are some of the things that we really need. We need to hear from nurses who are out there in the field doing great work. You know, a lot of us for many years kind of worked in silo because we were also nervous about letting people know what we did. The ridicule that I faced from my colleagues was, you know, I was called a pothead and a drug dealer, and you know, and I would always make this joke of like, yes, some of those things are true, you know. It's but it doesn't mean I'm not doing great work that you can't take seriously. So, you know, hearing from people out there that are doing this work and encouraging them to come out and share their experiences. You know, we need to be talking to our local politicians. We need to be writing to Congress. Tomorrow I'm going to be meeting with the CDC to talk to them about, you know, cannabis as an option for pain management. You know, they put out a call and said, you know, we're looking to hear from clinicians and patients and caregivers about options, you know, alternatives for pain management, alternatives to opiates. So anytime you see that, I encourage people to start getting out there and letting your voice be heard. It takes a while. I mean, locally here where I live, for the last 4 years, we've been going to city council meetings to try to really, you know, get cannabis accessible in our city. And, you know, finally after 4 years, we got through. But it's just like, it's just constant, like showing up, doing the work. And being, you know, as much of an advocate as you can is, I think strength in numbers still really goes a long way.
Right. And from what you mentioned a second ago, well, I guess you're really big on education. That you mentioned that so many times. You really believe in that. You believe that will make a big change in lives of so many people. So educating the medical community. Is it fair to say that, I'm just thinking about somebody that would have an opposition to getting some sort of an education from you or an organization like you? Is it fair to say that just because you're educated about cannabis and healthcare doesn't mean that you're going to be recommending it or suggesting it to everyone? Is that
right?
Accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, think about, like, again, it helps you direct patients. I mean, I think about how, you know, as nurses, you know, we are trying to see the big picture and help patients navigate, you know, their disease and their symptoms and provide them with resources. So somebody, you know, came to me, and I was a surgical nurse, and said, I really want to consider cannabis, you know, after my surgery for pain management. They could say, actually, here's a resource for you. I'm not an expert in it, but this person can really help you. Just like we would give a referral if you came in and you're like, my joints are all swollen. Well, I want you to see a rheumatologist, right? I want to see cannabis specialists that are part of the system that we refer people to. The endocannabinoid system is incredibly complex. You know, people aren't going to take a course or two and be experts in it, but at least they can feel some level of you know, confidence of like, okay, I understand that you know, this can work as a medicine, and I want it to be an option for my patients, and here's where I want to send them. That's what I would love to see happening more and more.
Okay, great. And let's see, so taking a left turn here as we're wrapping up. So I would imagine that in your line of work, there's a whole lot of stress. Like there's just a lot of tension, you know, whether someone is deathly ill or whether someone just has a whole bunch of questions and just feeling that. But then on the other side of educating the public, right, legislators and, you know, people in your communities, how do you handle that stress? Like, do you go to books? Do you go to movies, music? Like, is there anything that you're consuming in any of that helps you kind of keep it together?
I don't do a good job of it. I mean, that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
When I am in a good place with it, walking is really helpful for me. So exercise really helps clear my mind. And I do have some books that I really look towards, because I think being in an industry that is typically, at least from the medical professionals, seen as kind of a joke, and, you know, people don't take you seriously, or they make fun of you, or they're always pushing back and kind of giving you a hard time. I look to some books that really talk about leadership and how to be a good leader, and how not to take things personally, and how to, you know, stand up for what you believe in. So I really resonate with things like that help me kind of, you know, get more courage to go out there and be okay with people not liking what I do and making fun of me and pushing back. And and trying to focus on the patient. So often my patients are what lift me up. I mean, I got this email just a couple days ago from one of my patients, and it was just like, it was exactly what I needed. You know, he was just thanking me. He was like, I'm so glad you're out there. You've changed my life. No one else would really listen to me. So getting that kind of feedback does fill me up and keep me going.
That's great. Regarding the books, do you have any standout favorites or something that you've read recently?
I'm a big Brene Brown fan.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and she has a couple books. The most recent one is Dare to Lead.
Okay.
I think that's what it's called.
There,
I
remember there's one Daring Greatly, but then is there a Dare to Lead as well? I haven't seen that one.
I think, is it? Let me just check really quick here. Yep, Dare to Lead.
Dare to Lead. Okay.
Yeah, and she has the gifts of imperfection, and you know, really, because I think, you know, you hear a lot from people talking about imposter syndrome and, you know, struggling as leaders. And she's a researcher, you know, she's a social worker, but she's also a PhD researcher on, you know, shame and guilt and vulnerability. So it's really been helpful to get that perspective and, you know, look at her research where she's, you know, interviewed, you know, thousands and thousands of people on this subject, and to really take that and incorporate it into what I'm doing has been incredibly helpful.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that recommendation. And I guess everyone that's working in the cannabis and the hemp industry, I guess we could be seen as leaders, or we could look at ourselves as that, because really it's still a relatively small industry compared to others out there. And we're, especially in hemp, we're sort of firsts, right? Like pioneers in this thing. And it's really important how we portray ourselves to the public. And how we're communicating to folks, because that will have a lasting impact. You know, it's like that first impression people will remember. So how should we behave in selling our product or services? That's really important. And I think that's, just from what you said, I would encourage folks in the industry to consider themselves as leaders. And how do you want to leave a mark in the industry for everyone? So I'll put that book in the show notes. And then, Eloise, so how, if someone wants to get a hold of you or reach out to you or learn more about what you do, where should they go?
They can go to my website. It's Radicle, Radicle, healthcare.com. And there's options there. I still do patient consultations a couple times a week. If someone's out of state, I do an educational informational consultation that talks about, you know, how to pick your medicine safely, what you should be worried about, drug to drug interactions. Here in California, I take them on as a provider patient relationship. There's also options to explore our education that we've put together. My business partner, Timothy Byers, and I have put together education modules for nurses and other healthcare professionals. It's self-paced, it's online. We've got some really great content there. We also do a monthly webinar that's free, where people can come on and learn about, you know, different subjects. Last month we did cardiovascular disease and cannabis, because the American Heart Association came out with some negative publicity around, and you tend to see this a lot too in the media, you know, smoking pot causes heart attacks and, you know, all of these heart risks. So we went over the research and we talked about what was valid and where we still need to see more research to, in certain areas. And that's our Radicle community, and you can sign up through the website. If nurses are interested in joining the American Cannabis Nurses Association, it's cannabisnurses.org. And you can read about membership there. We're just about to launch our new website in the next couple of weeks. So that's really exciting. And, you know, if people want to take any sort of college accredited cannabis courses, I do teach for Pacific College Health and Sciences, and they have a medical cannabis certificate program. And it is 8 college credit units, and you get a certificate at the end. And it's a very intense program, but it is, you come out of it with quite a bit of knowledge around cannabis and clinical applications.
That's great. And do you have to be enrolled in a degree, or can you take just that class?
You can just take that certificate course.
Okay, great. That's a great option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Eloise, is there any final thought or ask that you want to leave people with?
I think it's really important that we try to work together as an industry. I think that's really important, that we listen to each other. I have so much to learn from the manufacturers and the growers and the industry, the lab testing professionals. And I would hope that, as nurses or healthcare professionals come into the industry, that we collaborate and that we work together for the better of the patients and the industry in general.
Great. It's a great place to end it. Eloise, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you do. And hopefully we can get another show here and do a part 2.
Thank you.
So have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye. Hey guys, and before you go, this is Jason from Spectrum Labs. Please be sure to visit us on the web at thespectrumlabs.com for any show notes and links discussed in the podcast. Also, remember to click the subscribe button wherever you may be listening from so you get notified when our next episode comes out. And tune in next show and have a fantastic day.